Hey, what's up YouTube? Today we are going to create a form using the Shadcn component library. If you've never used the Shadcn library before, don't worry. We're going to go over step by step on how you can implement these components inside of your application. And before we get started, we are going to go over what we're going to create in this video, and the framework we're going to be using is Next.js 14. So let's open up my other tab, and I'm on the localhost 3000 development server. And what I have in front of me is a register form that is built with the card, input, and form component from Shadcn. And the form component is actually built using the React-Hook-Form and Zod library. So Zod is just going to do validation on the client side and display these error messages to the client before the form is actually pushed and submitted on the server. And the React-Hook-Form library is just going to be able to create a form that is seamless and easy to use. And you're not going to want to use any other library to create a form now in the future. So before we get started, if you can hit that like button and also subscribe for more content just like this, that would be greatly appreciated. Other than that, let's get into the code. First thing you want to do is you want to create a Next.js project. To do that, we have to run npx create-next-app at latest. When you press enter, then you're going to get prompted to a few questions about your project. So what is your project name? We're going to say register form project. We are using TypeScript, so yes. ESLint, yes. Tailwind CSS, yes. The source directory, no. App router, yes. And we're going to keep the custom default import alias, so we're going to say no. Next, it's going to initialize the project, install all the dependencies and dev dependencies, and this should take about 15 to 30 seconds. After it's done installing, we are going to cd into the project, so it's going to be register form project, or whatever you named it, and then you're going to type code dot to open up the text editor of your choice, which is mine is VS Code. Now we have a boilerplate Next.js project, and the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to Shadcn, so it's ui.shadcn.com, and we're going to go to the docs, the installation tab, Next.js, and we're going to follow this step by step. So number one is create a project, which is what we just did. Number two is we're going to run the CLI to initialize Shadcn onto our project. I'm using npm, so I'm going to copy this, come back to our code, open up the terminal, and then paste the command for the CLI. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to use Shadcn inside of our application. And what style would we like to use? We're going to put default. It's going to ask us questions down here. Which color would you like to use for the base color? We're going to put slate. And then would you like to use CSS variables for colors? We're going to say yes. So it's going to create a components JSON file. It's also going to create a lib folder and a components folder. The lib folder you don't have to worry about for this specific project, but it is useful if you do want to do some certain styling techniques. Okay, next we want to go back to Shadcn, and we want to get the components that we're going to use for our project. So to do that, you can look at the left side down here underneath the components header, and the components we're going to need is we're going to need a button. We're going to just always install it with the CLI. We're never going to do manual. Even though it's the same thing, the CLI makes it 100 times easier. We're going to do the CLI for the button. And I'm going to show you exactly where it goes after. So when we do that command, if you look inside of your components folder, it creates another folder inside of it, and then the button.tsx file. So this button.tsx file is all of the styles and variants for the button that we can use inside of our project. So we actually don't have to touch this file at all. All we have to do is we have to import the button into our component that we're using, and then just render the button as a component. It is that simple. So if you do want to change variant, you can come inside of the button.tsx file and change any of this Tailwind CSS code to your liking. So it is customizable. Next, let's go back. Let's get the card component. You do the CLI as well. After the card, I want to get the form component. and then I'm going to get the input component as well. So these are the 4 components we're going to be using for our form. Well, there's actually going to be 5 because the form component actually does give us the label component as well, but it's kind of inside of the form label. So it is 5, but technically 4 installs. Okay, so now if you want to make sure everything's here, just look in your folder at the top here. We have the button, the card, the form, the input, and the label. Like I said, there's 5, but we only did 4 installs, which is fine. And how we could use these is we just import them into the component and do them as self-closing tags components inside of our application. Okay. Next step is we want to go inside of our app directory and we want to go inside of our home page. We can remove all of the code inside of the main element, create a div element, and then just create an H1 that says home. We're not going to be using this page. So the first half of this video is we're just going to be styling the form and making sure all of our files and pages, all that stuff looks good and is organized like it should be in any project. So that will take us a little bit of time. And then the second half of this video is going to be of us actually creating the form. So if you do want to just skip to us creating the form, I'm going to have everything timestamped below so you can skip around to whatever parts you want. But like I said, first we're going to actually style the form and make sure all the files and folders are organized. So the first thing we want to do is inside of the app directory, I am going to create a new folder called auth. And this creates a localhost 3000, which is our homepage, /auth route. So any folder inside of the app directory is considered a route on the URL. And then inside of it, you could create a page.tsx to make it public facing, but we're not going to do that for now. We're actually going to create another folder inside of auth, and we're going to call this register. And then we're going to make this one public facing called page.tsx. And then inside of auth again, let's create another folder called login, and then have this as a page.tsx. So these 2 routes are public facing, and we need to create a React functional component. So I'm going to run the command RAFCE. That is a React arrow function. And we are going to say login page. And you can name the functions whatever you want. All that matters is the folders and file convention for the actual URL routes. And that snippet I just used, the RAFCE, if you go to the extensions and type in ES7, it is this extension right here, and then you could start using those snippets as well in your code. And then if we go to the register page, we do RAFCE, and it's a React functional component. We just call this the register page, and we are good to go. Okay, so now an important concept inside of Next.js is server pages and client pages. So whenever possible, you want to have your page be a server component or server page. This gives you a lot of benefits that a client page doesn't, but a client page is still very necessary in your code, and it does get a bad stigma acting like you should never use client pages. That is totally false. Client pages are still fine, but client pages will only be used if you're using any client interactivity like on clicks, on change, anything that requires the user to interact with the page, or if you need to use any hooks from React or from Next.js. So this needs to be a use client. And to do that, you just mark the page as a use client directive, but we do want to make the register page a server page. So to do that, we are actually just going to keep this with the no use client directive because by default, they all are server components inside of Next.js. And what we want to do is we want to render a register form. And then this register form component, which we haven't created yet, is going to be a client component. So we're going to create this inside the components, create a new folder called auth. And inside the auth, we're going to create a new file called registerform.tsx. We'll use the snippet RAFCE, rename the component register form with capitals, go inside of our register page, and then make sure we import this at the top. So now this is a server page, and the register form we are going to make as a use client because we're going to need some interactivity and some hooks as well. So this is where all of the main functionality for our register form is going to go. And we could do the same thing for the login page. So if we do login form, create inside the auth components a login form.tsx file. Make sure you import at the top here. Perfect. Remove this import from React we don't need. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on the register page inside of the register form. So like I said, before we start actually coding the form, we want to make sure everything looks good and make sure the UI is set up properly. So if we look back at the example I showed at the beginning, you can see that we have like this card element, which is created from the card component. And then we have like a header, some text here, the inputs. It just looks nice and it looks good and it's centered on the page. So that's what we're going to do is we're going to make sure everything's styled and then create the form. So if we come in here in the register form inside the components, first thing we want to do is we want to create that card. So we're going to create a component called card wrapper. And the reason why we are creating the card wrapper component is because this will allow us to make a reusable component that we can use both for the login form and the register form, making the variables and values dynamic. So let's create the card wrapper .tsx file, run rafce, call this card wrapper. And then let's make sure we import it inside the register form. Okay, so the card wrapper is going to wrap our whole form, okay? And for this to be dynamic, we need to pass in props into the card wrapper. So there's going to be a few props we're going to pass in. First, we want to pass in a header label, or we can just name it label. And this label is going to be create an account. Next, we want to pass in a title, which this title we are going to name register. So if it's the login page component form, we are just going to have the title as login. So this is what makes it dynamic, and it just makes your code a lot better and reusable. Next thing we want is a back button href. And this back button href is going to go to /auth/login. So if they don't already have a registered account, we're just going to go back to the login page. And then the back button label is going to be login. Or it doesn't have to be login. It could be already have an account, login here, which is perfect. Okay. So now we're getting an error because the card wrapper is like, hey, we're not accepting these props. But if we go inside the card wrapper, we can actually accept these props. So we're going to say label. I think it was title. The other one was back button href, and the other one is back button label. And then what we need to do is define the types up here, which we can just say interface, card wrapper props, the label, title, back button, all of it are strings. They're all strings. And then we could define it as the card wrapper props here. And now we have no more errors. So the next step we want to do is start kind of like styling this card wrapper. So the card wrapper component is going to be the card. So we're going to have to use all of, pretty much, we're going to use the card component that we got from Shadcn. So we are going to import the card component from Shadcn. So it's just like this. So we're importing the card content, the card header, and the card footer from the @/components/UI/card. And I do want to make this a use client as well. Okay, so inside of the card wrapper, we're going to wrap everything in a card. And if you want to see how this looks too, you could go to Shadcn, see the docs. It explains it pretty well. So if we go there, we go to card, you can see the preview, and then you can see the code of what it made in the preview. But we're just going to code out ourselves for now. So we have the card, and then what we have below that is we're going to have the card header. And the card header is actually going to display another component called auth header, because this is going to have to be dynamic, and what we want to pass into it is the label and then the title as well. And like I said, this is going to allow us to use this component for the login and register page, not just the register page. So that's why it's going to be really nice to do. So it's going to give us an error because we haven't created the auth header component yet, which is fine. We're going to have the card content. And let's make this a self-closing tag. Okay, cool. And the card content is going to, what's in the card content is going to be all the children. And the cool thing about the children is that the children is going to be everything inside of this card wrapper right here. So this is the wrapper, and everything inside, so like this div is going to be the children technically. So what we could do in the card wrapper is we need to accept the children, which is a React.React node, and then we could just pass it in here as children like that. Perfect. And the only error we have is the auth header, which is totally fine. And then underneath the card content is we have the card footer. And the card footer, which I don't know why I didn't. Okay. So the card footer, what we're going to have is we're going to have a component called the back button. So this is going to allow us to give us functionality to click to go back to either the login page or register page, vice versa. So what we want to pass in here is the label, and the label we're going to name this is going to be the back button label, and the href, which is the path that we want to go, is going to be the back button href. So we're going to get two errors. We need to create both these components, which let's do that right now. So we're going to create a component called auth header.tsx rfce auth header. We could import this at the top like that, and then we can create a back button. So back button.tsx rfce. We're going to name this back button. Come back in here and go like that. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to accept the props inside of the components we just created. So let's go inside the auth header. Let's accept the label and title. Let's create an interface to define the types, and then make sure we kind of check the types with the auth header props, just like that. And let's do the same thing with the card wrapper. I mean, not the card wrapper, the back button. So the back button is also going to set the label and title, which is the back button label and title. And we create interface for this as well. Back button props, they're both strings. And we're going to label that as back button props. Oh, it's label and href, my fault, it's not title. So that's why we're getting that error. So let's go back. Label and href. Label and href. Okay, so now we're good. And let's style the wrapper card real quick. So let's say the width on extra large strings, let's say the width is 1/4 of the parent container, whatever that's going to be. And then the width is going to be 1/2 on mid-size and up screens of the parent. We're going to have a shadow of MD. And let's just check to see what it looks like right now. So that's not, where is the page? Our local host isn't actually running, I don't think. No, it's not. So those are projects that I created before this. And we can run this on localhost 3001. And what we can do is we could go to /auth/register, which is the page we created. And then as you can see, we have the auth header and the back button. But we haven't actually rendered the label and title, and we haven't rendered the label and href here. So let's do that right now. So inside of the auth header, let's actually write the code, which that's all you saw was the auth header div. So we're going to create a parent div, and inside the parent div, let's have an h1 that is dynamically rendering the label based on the value, or not the label, the title. We have title and label. And then underneath, we are going to have a p tag that is going to dynamically render the label. So let's style some Tailwind CSS classes onto our parent div. We're going to have width of full. We're going to have flex. We're going to have a flex column. We'll have a gap y of 4, give some spacing. We'll have item center, and then justify center as well. Our H1, we're going to have text as 3XL, and we're going to have the font semi-bold. And then for the P tag, the P element, let's have the text muted foreground, and let's have the text small. Okay, cool. And then let's style the back button now. So the back button, we just have to import, we're going to use the button component from Shadcn. It's going to look like that. And like I said, we could use different variants. So you're going to access the variant prop, and the variant we want to use is the link variant. We're going to style this with font normal and width of full. And then we could also define the size prop, which we're going to define as small. And then we have to have the asChild prop, because we are going to add a link component from Next.js inside of the button, which we need the asChild prop to make sure the button actually works. So the href is just going to equal the href. And inside of the link, we're just going to show the button as the label. So the label for the back button is going to say, already have an account, log in here, and the href is the /auth/login. So let's check to see if this is working. So we have our title, our label, we have our back button href, and if we click it, it goes to the login form. So everything is working good, but the only thing is now the card is at the top left, so let's fix that. So to fix that, the reason why I kind of organized my folders like this from app and auth folder, and I had both the login and register page in the auth folder, is because I want to give a layout file to this auth folder. And what that is going to do, it is going to allow us to style both the login and register page within the auth folder's layout.tsx file, because whatever children the auth folder has, this layout is going to style all of those children as well. So what we're going to do is we are going to create an RFCE, React Functional Component. We will name this auth layout. And like I said, any of these styles is going to affect all of the children. So to do that, we have to pass in the children as a prop. Define the children up here, and that is a React.React node. And what we can do is we could have a section element, and then I'm going to have a div as well, and then inside this is where we're going to render the children. So the children are going to be the login page and the register page, since they are the children of this auth folder. And what we are going to do is let's style it now with some Tailwind class CSS. So this width is going to be full, so that whole section. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to have the height of screen. We're going to make it flex, item center, and justify center as well. And what this div right here is doing, it is making that card centered on the screen. So if we look back, you can see the card centered now. And the only thing we're missing is the form. So we're pretty much almost ready, if not ready, to create the form. So let's go back to our code. And if we go to our register form, our card wrapper is good. We're passing in props. It's a reusable component. Everything looks good and ready to go. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually create the form now. So to create the form, we also have to import the form from the @components/UI/form path. So let me import that at the top. That could be the first thing we do. And if we go back to the Shadcn docs and we go to the form component, we could scroll down. You could read some of the features, what the forms are. It says forms are tricky. They're one of the most common things you'll build in a web application, but they're also one of the most complex. So the forms is built on top of React-Hook-Form and Zod. So like I said, we could do client-side validation, and we can use the features that React-Hook-Form allows us to use, which makes forms very, very easy to implement and just very user-friendly. So what we are going to do is we are going to go down to the usage. So the first step we should do is create a form schema. So we're going to create a form schema using a Zod schema. So to do that, I'm going to close all of these folders here. And on the root layer of our project, we're going to create a folder called schema. Create a file in there called index.ts. And this is where I'm going to define my register schema. So I have to import all as Z from Zod. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to export, make sure you export it, a register schema. You can name this whatever you want. And now we're going to use Zod library and the syntax from those docs. So if you don't know Zod, you can look at the docs or you can just follow me. So we're going to define an object. So this object, we're going to define its types. And then if it doesn't meet the types, then we're going to throw a error message. So first thing first is we need to decide what we're going to require the user to register with. So we want the user to register with an email, a name, a password, and confirming the password. Obviously, with your project, you can do what you please, but we're going to do the email first. And it is going to be a string and it is also going to be an email. So it must be an email. And then inside of the email, we could do an object that displays a message. And this message is going to say, please enter a valid email address. So that means if they don't enter a valid email address inside of the form when they actually press the submit button, they're going to get this message displayed on the screen, making it a great user experience. So next, we are going to have the name z.string. And then we could also give it a minimum. And the minimum for a name should just be 1. Who knows? Somebody might have a 1-character name. I don't know anybody who does, but a 1 character, that means they have at least typed something. And so that means we're going to throw an error message if they don't type anything that says, please enter your name if they don't. Okay. Next thing is going to be password. And this is going to be GitHub Copilot is nailing it right at the head. It's going to be a string, and we want a minimum characters of 6. And if they don't meet that criteria, our error message is going to display password must be at least 6 characters long. And then the confirm password. What we're going to do here is we're going to do z.string, and we're just going to do the same thing. .min of 6, and then display an error message of password must be at least 6 characters long. And then you're probably wondering, when do you do the check to make sure the password and the confirmed password actually match? I do that in the backend with bcrypt. So the form would get submitted, but then an error message would be displayed based on sending that error from the server to the front end. But that's not going to be in this video. But if you're wondering, that's how I usually do my checks to make sure passwords match or not. So now we have completely pretty much successfully finished our register schema. What we can do is we can go inside of the register form, go at the top, and let's import that register schema up here. And then the next thing we have to do, which is step 2, is we have to define a form. So if we go inside of here, we define a form. And we use the useForm hook from React-Hook-Form to create the form. So we have to import this hook. So I might as well just copy it from here. Import it. And then we are setting it to a variable called form. We're using the useForm, which takes in an object and two props. And those props, one is going to be a resolver, and the other one is going to be your default values. So those are the two properties that the useForm hook takes in for our case. So the resolver function allows you to use an external validation library like Zod to validate the inputs. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say resolver, and it is the Zod resolver from @hook-form /resolvers /Zod. And then we are passing in that register schema that we created inside of our schema folder. So this allows us to use those schemas inside of our form. Next, we are going to define the default values. So the default values is going to be an object, and it's going to be the email, name, password, and the confirm password. And they're all going to be empty strings to start. So that's why you see them as empty strings, and they're just the initial values on the inputs. So that was step 2, was to create the form using the useForm hook, as you can see here. And then we had to define the submit handler. So they named their function on submit. We'll do the same thing. So right below this, let's do a cons on submit equals an arrow function, and it's just empty for now. And we can just do console log submitted. Okay. I'm trying to get rid of the terminal. One sec. Okay, there we go. Next thing we need to do is we need to, so we're getting an error right now. It's because it's pretty much saying we're missing children. Property children is missing. So the children are everything inside of here. So let's just add the form component. And this form is actually going to start building the form for us using the Shadcn library. So the form is going to actually take in the spread operator of the form variable that we created up top with useForm hook. So just like that. And it's going to pass all of the attributes and properties from this form into the form right here. Next, we're going to create an HTML form right below it. And then this HTML form below it, this is going to be an on submit. And the on submit is going to equal the form.handleSubmit function, and it accepts the on submit function that we created above here. So right here. And this looks a little different than the syntax you're probably used to if you're creating a regular form with HTML. And this handle submit right here, this form.handleSubmit, this pretty much is a method that takes a callback function, which is this on submit. It takes it as an argument, and it's only called if the form is validated and ready to go. So it's going to make sure all the fields are validated using our Zod resolver that we passed in with the register schema. And if everything matches up, then they're going to fire this on submit function off. And the on submit function is usually where you have your logic talking to your backend, so you could actually send this form to a database. Okay, so that's that right there. Next, we want to give this a class name, and it's just going to take in one Tailwind CSS class, which we're going to have space y of 6. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to have space between each input that we're showing. We don't want everything, crammed. So that's why that class is doing that. Next, we're going to have a div. And inside this div, we're going to have spaces in between each input now of 4. Cool. Perfect. Okay. So next thing I want to do is let's start working on the form fields. So the form field is from up top that we imported, and this is a self-closing tag as well. In the form field, we pass in 3 props, and the props are control, name, and render. And this is also going to create this as a controlled component. So this means that all of our state is handled within the component and not the React DOM. So if it's an uncontrolled component, you're using like the use ref hook, and that is controlled by the React DOM. In our case, the React-Hook-Form uses state in the backend, so we don't have to even import the use state hook, and it stores it in the state, and then it'll submit it to our onSubmit function and do everything for us. So like I said, the three props are the control, name, and render. So the control allows us to pretty much store the state inside of the form.control. So that's what that's doing. The name is going to be pretty much the variable we're storing it in. So the name for the first one is going to be email. I mean, you can only use the default values and the values you define. So it's going to be either email, name, password, confirm password. And then after that, we have to pass in the render prop. And this render prop is going to do a callback function. And it's going to pass in the field. And it's going to be an arrow function. And what we're going to do is we're going to render out the form item here. So the form item like that. And then inside of the form item, we are going to have a form label. This form label is what the user is going to see. So the label should be email or whatever the input is. And then underneath the form label, let's do the form control. So inside the form control is where we're going to be able to put our input component to actually accept what the user is typing. And we are going to pass in the field by using the spread operator, which is going to pass in all of the attributes and properties from the field into the input. And the type is going to be email. And then we could also do a placeholder, which you could do whatever. I'm going to do johndoe@gmail.com. And this input is ready to go and ready to use to be sent to our backend. So let's check it out to make sure it looks good. So if we go to localhost 3001, we have our email here and it is ready to go with our placeholder. So the next steps are pretty easy overall. So we could take the whole form field, that's a self-closing component, and then copy it down 3 times. So I'm pressing Control Alt down arrow. So 1, 2, 3. And then let's just change the label. For this one, it's going to be name. We're going to change the name to the name variable. The type, we don't need a type at all. The placeholder, we could just do John Doe. And then let's change the password, which is going to be password. Put this as password as the form label. The type is going to be password, which this is going to hide when they type on the input. So it's going to show like the asterisk. The placeholder should just be asterisk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the last field should be confirm password. And then we have to name this the same, which we named it confirm password up there. Camel cased. And then type would be password. And then the same thing for the placeholder. Okay. And then the other thing I do want to add is it's called the form message, which is right here in the the import. And the form message is going to show us these error messages we created here in the schema. So this is going to be right underneath the form control, and it's going to be a self-closing tag. And it's not going to accept anything. It's just going to be the form message. So it's underneath every form control. Perfect. Okay, so now let's see how our development server is looking. Okay, so my computer is just autofilling, as you can see here. Save passwords for the site. I'm going to put no. You see it's just doing this. Which is fine. I could just remove this. Even though the default values are strings, it's doing that, but let's see if everything is working good. So we have the 4 inputs. The only thing we're missing is the button to submit it. So let's create that. So underneath, let's see, which div can we go underneath? We could go underneath, try this div. We're doing the button from Shadcn, and this button could just be called register for now. And this button is going to be of type submit because it's inside of the form HTML. It is also going to have a class name of with full. And then other than that, that should be looking good. Let's just see if it's in the right spot, and it is. So everything is looking good. And let me press register and see if all of the client side validation is working. That is also displaying the error messages. So as you can see, our error messages are popping up where the form message component is. The only thing I do want to change is I don't want our labels to turn red. And this is by default. So that means we have to go inside of our components folder, inside of the UI, and then inside of the form. So like I said, you usually don't have to touch this file, but if you do want to change some default styles, you can. And we do want to change the form label. So we have to look for the form label, which is right here, the variable form label. And then we have to change the style right here that says text destructive to text black. So if there's an error, the text is still going to be black. And as you can see, if I get rid of this, you see the text is still black with the validation errors like that. Okay, so that works good. Next thing I want to do is I want to make sure we're actually getting the values inside of this onSubmit handler. So what we are going to do is we are going to define it as data, and we are going to use Z from Zod, and we're going to use .infer. So that means we're going to infer that the types are going to be type of register schema. So this is just checking to make sure, again, that all of the types are of type register schema. And what we can do is we can actually console log the data. And this console is going to pop up on our client side since this is a use client component. So let's save this. Go to our form. We can refresh it. Put the name again. Let's do our console. Oh, not page source, console. And let's press register. And as you can see, we are getting the values for the confirmed password, email, name, and password. So everything is working good. Our validation is working. If we don't put a name, it says please enter your name, it won't even submit it. And it's showing, hey, you need to submit it. So everything, this form is working amazing and how it should. So obviously this on submit, you're going to put your logic of how you're going to send it to your backend and how you're going to send it to a database and whatever else you want to do with the data. Next thing I want to do is I want to create the login form now. So to do the login form, it's pretty much the same way. What we're going to do is inside of the components, we have the login form, and we are going to go inside the register form, copy all the code, go to the login form, paste it. Make sure you change the function name to login form. Change it here to login form. And then the good thing about creating the card wrapper was now we could just change the props values. So instead of creating an account, we could say login to your account. The title is going to be login. The back button is actually going to take us to the register page now. And it's going to say don't have an account, register here. And then we only need 2 input fields for the register, which I'm only required email and password. So I'm going to remove the name form field and the confirm password form field. and then change this button to login instead. And then everything looks good. And the only other thing we need to change is we need to create a login schema as well. So let's create a login schema because we're only accepting 2 values and we can't use the register schema. So for this, it's just going to be email and password. Pretty much Copilot is giving me what I should do, which is perfect. And let's explain this. We have an email. It's going to be a string. It has to be an email as well. Please enter valid email, error message, string, minimum of 6 password. Password must be at least 6 characters long. So that is for the login schema. Let's go into it now, the login form. Let's, instead of register schema, we're going to import the login schema. And let's change wherever it says register schema to login schema. And then let me make sure everything looks good. Everything looks good to go except for the default values. So we have email and password. Okay, now everything looks good. So let's check our forms out. So we refresh the page. Already have an account, login, register, login, register. Perfect. So everything is working how it should. Let's go back in and let's do one more thing to make this even better. And then we should call it a day. Okay, so the last thing we are going to do is we are going to use a hook from React called the useFormStatus hook. So this useFormStatus hook will actually be very helpful for the button. And what it's going to do is, let me see, So useFormStatus, this is a hook from React DOM. And what we have to do is we want to use the pending state from it. So right below the onSubmit, I'm going to say const, and then it's an object pending equals the useFormStatus, and it doesn't take in any parameters. So it's just like that. And now whenever the form status is actually pending, we can just make this button disabled. So we could add a disabled right here for the button. And then when it's pending, the useFormStatus is pending as well. So just like that. That is the useFormStatus. And the other thing we could do is, since this is a client component, let's import some state and let's create a quick loader. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a loader, and we could call it const loading and then set loading, and then the initial value is going to be false. And then when we actually click the button, let's set loading to true, and it's just going to stay true. And then obviously you can set to false after it does your backend pretty much logic. But for now, we're just going to do that for that. And then we can make this button dynamic. So if loading is true, you're going to put loading. If not, log in. And then let's do the same thing for the register form. So we're going to import the useFormStatus hook from React DOM. We are going to use the pending from useFormStatus, and let's disable the button if the form is pending. Just like that. And let's import useState from React. Let's create some state called loading and set loading. Set the loading to true when we click the button, and let's make this dynamic based on if loading is true or not. So if loading is true, we're going to show loading. If not, register. Okay, so let's see if this all works. So we refresh the page. We're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We could click register, and it shows loading, and it's just going to keep showing loading because I never set it back to false. But you guys get the point. And that is how you create a form using Shadcn and client-side validation. I hope you guys liked this video and you gained a lot of value out of it. And if you did, hit that like button and also subscribe for more content like that. Other than that, thank you again for joining me, and you guys have a great day.